Firstpost reports from the world's second largest continent. Hello, I'm Alison Lagrange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. From elections to climate change to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global South. Join me every weekday live on Firstpost. Hello and welcome to Firstpost Africa, where we get you the top stories from the continent and from across the world. I'm Alison Lagrange, coming to you live from Durban, South Africa. First, let's take a look at the headlines. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu orders strikes on alleged terror centers in the West Bank after explosions in 3 empty buses in Bat Yam, near Tel Aviv. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and French President Emmanuel Macron will meet US President Donald Trump next week amid friction between Washington and its European allies over the Ukraine war. Sweden investigates a possible breach of an undersea cable off the island of Gotland in the Baltic, an area where multiple seabed cables have been damaged in recent months. Now, 3 commercial flights diverted as Chinese warships undertake apparent live-fire drills in the seas between Australia and New Zealand. Leaders of Hong Kong's Democratic Party, the city's largest opposition group, announced plans to dissolve amid China's crackdown on dissent. Hello and welcome. South Africa is currently the epicenter of the world politics as it hosts the crucial G20 Foreign Ministers Summit. This summit, however, comes at a time of rising geopolitical tension over wars, conflicts and trade. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa opened the summit and welcomed all leaders with call for cooperation. He said multilateralism and international law were key to solve world crises.
Modern day challenges can only be resolved through collaboration, through partnership, through dialogue, and through solidarity. This is why South Africa has placed as its theme for the G20 the issues of solidarity, equality, and sustainability. These are at the center of South Africa's presidency of the G20.
Top diplomats from the world's largest economies are in Johannesburg for the 2-day talks, held for the first time in Africa. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, China's Wang Yi, India's S. Jaishankar, Britain's David Lammy and France's Jean-Noel Barrot are in attendance, along with other leaders. However, missing from these talks is U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, amid disputes with the host nation over several policy issues. He had earlier labeled South Africa's agenda for the summit as anti-American. Host leader Cyril Ramaphosa was quick to play down the absence of Donald Trump's top diplomat. He said that Rubio's absence was not a train smash or the end of the world, as long as the G20 family is able to meet and discuss important matters.
You know, some leaders, it's not the end of the world. As long as the G20 family is able to meet, discuss important issues, and come out with a declaration. And that is what we aim for. We are committed to having a good relationship with the United States, and we do relate to them in a number of ways. And what has ensued now with the Secretary of State not attending is in the end not a train smash, because the United States is still represented here. I'm a solutions-oriented person, and I think President Trump is as well, and we will find solutions in this regard.
Now, the G20 Foreign Ministers Summit in South Africa is a precursor to the G20 Leaders Summit scheduled for November. But it comes at a time when world leaders have also been split on their responses to three major issues. The first is the Russia-Ukraine war. The second is the Gaza conflict. And the third is dramatic policy shifts from Washington since the return of Donald Trump. Pretoria, in particular, has come under fire from Washington. The main reason is South Africa's case at the International Court of Justice, where it has accused Israel of genocide in Gaza. US President Trump also halted aid to South Africa, adding that the country was renewing its commercial, military and nuclear arrangements with Iran, something that Pretoria denied. With the US Secretary of State absent from the meeting, Russia is at the forefront. The war in Ukraine and the latest round of peace talks between Russia, the US in Riyadh have caused a wide rift between Washington and its allies. Signs of tensions within the grouping were evident, more so after the planned family photograph was cancelled, as several countries reportedly did not wish to appear next to Russia's Sergei Lavrov. But the South African president made sure that the top Russian diplomat does not feel isolated. Ramaphosa held a bilateral meeting with Sergei Lavrov on the sidelines of the G20 meeting. South Africa has been strengthening its ties with Russia, more so since cracks in its relations with the US under Donald Trump. South Africa says it maintains a neutral stance on the Russia-Ukraine war. It even abstained from a UN resolution criticizing Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The Russian foreign minister also held a closed-door meeting of top G20 diplomats in South Africa. Following the meeting, British Foreign Minister David Lammy said that he saw no appetite from Russia for peace with Ukraine.
Not got anywhere near a negotiated settlement. And I have to say, when I listen to what the Russians and what Lavrov has just said in the chamber this afternoon, I don't see an appetite to really get to that peace. And that peace could be achieved by leaving Ukraine tomorrow, just going and letting people get on with their lives and letting them have their sovereignty. We look forward to speaking to President Trump more about this. We're very, very clear. There must be a role for Ukraine. It must be at the heart of these negotiations. Of course they want peace, but they will need security guarantees.
South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa said the first G20 presidency by an African nation was an opportunity for the continent to be heard on critical global issues, including sustainable development, digital economy and green energy. But are the tensions between the world powers obstructing the key agenda? Now, to discuss more on this, we have with us Phumlani Majozi, an author and a political analyst, who is joining us live from Johannesburg, South Africa. Thank you for being with us, Phumlani.
Great to be here. Just to correct something, I'm live in London, not Johannesburg. Yeah, let's continue.
Live in London. Thank you. Well, with the absence of U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and the presence of the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, how do these geopolitical tensions impact the effectiveness of this G20 as a platform for global diplomacy?
Well, first thing to say is that the G20 was something big for South Africa and for Africa, because as you have said in your program, this is the first time that an African country gets to host the G20 summit. So Africa is on the spotlight. Now, for the US if the US disengages this year from the G20, I think it will not be good because you need the US as a superpower, right? If something is international and it doesn't have the backing of the US is not fully engaged in that program or initiative, that program it becomes weak, right? So you need the US to be engaged. Marco Rubio boycotting the meetings of foreign ministers. I strongly believe that this is just a warning for South Africa. We don't know what might come ahead. It's just a warning to say, look, if you don't change your stance on various things that we are concerned about, it's even possible that Mr. Donald Trump, the US president, might not make it to the actual G20 meetings in November this year in Johannesburg. So these are still just, warnings from the US. We are not sure what more the US could do sometime this year. As it has said, it is still investigating the happenings in South Africa. So we are not sure what's going on there. But if the US does disengage in this G20 event during the course of this year, that would not be good, for the world and for South Africa as well as the host, I believe.
Right. South Africa has emphasized multilateralism and international law, yet, of course, it's facing criticism from the US over its policies. How is Pretoria navigating its relationships with Western powers and BRICS allies within this G20 framework?
Look, I think it's difficult to say now. It's too late. We have to be frank here, Alison. It is too late because these tensions between the US and South Africa, they didn't begin with Trump, who took over a month ago as the US president. It was something that was already in the making over the past 8-10 years or so. We saw the US-South Africa relations getting a bit more rocky, over the years. In fact, before Trump came in, this is during the Biden administration. I think I've said this in other programs. The South African US relations were already being reviewed as to how can the US change its approach when it comes to South Africa. So the nature of the relationship between South Africa and the US, it was a matter that was becoming a bipartisan concern in Washington, right? So it was a matter that both the Democrats and the Republicans were looking into and wanted to adjust, to change the approach, when it comes to engaging South Africa. So my point is that it may be too late to say, is there anything we can really do here to effect any change with respect to our relations with the US? Because apparently our government has been trying to reach to the US. They have been making calls over the past weeks to try and organize the meetings. And guess what? The US is not responding. It's quiet. So we shall see how things unfold, how things turn out in the upcoming months, and hopefully the US will come on board and the negotiations begin.
Right. Phumlani, thank you. It's always great to have you on Firstpost Africa. We appreciate your valued insights and analysis.
Thank you.
On to updates from Sudan now, where the ongoing civil war has triggered a diplomatic standoff between the army-backed government and Kenya. The Sudanese government has recalled its ambassador from Kenya in protest over Nairobi hosting its paramilitary foes. At a high-profile event in Nairobi today, Sudan's paramilitary RSF, which has been at war with the Sudanese army for nearly 2 years now, will sign a founding charter with its allies to set up a peace and unity government in Sudan. Reports say RSF chief Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, popularly known as Hemedti, is also in Nairobi for the announcement. The Sudanese army is fuming at Kenya for providing a platform for its paramilitary RSF for announcing a parallel government. In a statement earlier, Sudan's foreign ministry called Kenyan President William Ruto's stand disgraceful, hostile, and an act of betrayal. The Sudan government also accused Kenya of encouraging conspiracy that violates Sudan's sovereignty. Kenya defended its decision to host the RSF event, saying it was compatible with its role in peace negotiations, in which it has sought to act as a mediator. In response, Sudan's army-backed government accused William Ruto of acting on his commercial and personal interests with the RSF's regional sponsors. The Sudanese government implied the United Arab Emirates, which has been accused of arming the paramilitary RSF. Last month, Kenya and the UAE signed an economic deal, which Ruto's office hailed as a historic milestone. In January this year, when Sudan's foreign minister visited Nairobi, he was given an assurance by the Ruto government that Kenya had no intentions of supporting a parallel government in the war-hit nation. Now, Nairobi says it has reconsidered its position. It did not mention a parallel government, but pushed for dialogue. Last year, the Kenyan president also hosted RSF chief Medeti at the State House in Nairobi. William Ruto shares a long-time friendship with the RSF leader. The Sudan army chief had previously opposed Kenya's role in mediation, accusing its president, William Ruto, of bias. Kenya had dismissed these claims back then. The RSF is gearing up to form a rival government, which comes as it seeks to consolidate its hold on the Darfur region of Western Sudan. Here, only Al Fasher city and areas around it are held by the army. The civil war has torn Sudan into two. The army is in control of the north and the east, while the RSF holds nearly all of the west and swathes of the south. In a series of offensives, the army has retaken parts of the capital, Khartoum. It has also closed in on the symbolic presidential palace along the Nile. Time and again, talks of a ceasefire in Sudan have failed. The warring generals have shown little interest in a long-term ceasefire. While they wrestle for power, it is people of Sudan who have lost the most. The war has reportedly killed 150,000 people, displaced over 12 million, put at least 8 million on the brink of starvation, and nearly 25 million, which is around half of Sudan's population, suffered dire food insecurity. What is interesting to note is that an African nation, South Africa, is hosting the G20 Summit for the first time. Top diplomats from across the world are holding talks, but the focus remains on Ukraine and Gaza. Will the world leaders turn their attention toward devastation and conflicts in Africa? And from war-torn Sudan, let us move to another conflict zone. The crisis in the DRC's mineral-rich east is worsening with each passing day. Congolese soldiers have been deserting their posts and fleeing as the Rwanda-backed M23 rebels march through the east. Amid the growing advances of the M23 in North Kivu province, the DRC army is urging soldiers who fled to rejoin their units and help prevent further territorial losses. Reports suggest that a military spokesperson for the operations in North Kivu's province, whose capital city of Goma was captured late in January, has ordered runaway soldiers around the town of Lubero to return to their posts within 12 hours. The spokesperson further called on all the soldiers to refrain from theft and other illegal acts. The Congolese army request came as terrified residents in Lubero, where clashes have continued for over 72 hours, accused the soldiers of looting in the face of the M23 advances toward the town. The residents described chaotic scenes with soldiers bursting gunfire, as well as looting shops that sell mobile phones and clothes. Meanwhile, Lubero's military administrator has said that order was restored and blamed a group of undisciplined soldiers for sowing panic in North Kivu town. Reports suggest that Ugandan troops have also been patrolling Lubero to provide security. Now, this is not the first instance of soldiers deserting their post and fleeing the country's east. In the neighboring South Kivu province, Congolese soldiers staged a disorderly retreat last week when the M23 rebels marched toward the provincial capital of Bukavu and eventually captured it. Soldiers have also fled on boats across Lake Tanganyika. This to avoid fighting the Rwanda-backed rebels, whose latest offensive has already alarmed the wider region and the international community. Now, they have begun mounting pressure on Kigali to withdraw its military support for the Tutsi-led M23 rebels. On Thursday, the United States imposed sanctions on a Rwandan government minister and a senior member of an armed group for their alleged role in the conflict. The U.S. State Department warned Kigali to end its support for the M23 at the earliest and to return to Angola-led negotiations. Now, this came just a day after the top U.S. diplomat, Marco Rubio, spoke with his Angolan counterpart about the conflict in the DRC. And now Rwanda has constantly rejected allegations from the DRC, the United Nations, and Western powers that it supports the M23 with arms and troops. In a statement, Kigali called the U.S. sanctions unjustified and unfounded, adding that if sanctions could resolve the crisis, they would have been in peace in the region decades ago. Now, Kigali further said that the international community should support, not undermine, the ongoing regional efforts toward a political solution. However, Kinshasa has welcomed the U.S. sanctions on Rwanda. It is pushing for more such sanctions from the international community to force Rwanda to withdraw its troops. But the question remains, will the international community do so? For our last story today, let's move to West Africa, where after nearly 2 years of dispute, the Canadian miner Barrick Gold has reportedly signed a new agreement with the junta-led authorities in Mali. Now, reports suggest that Barrick Gold has signed an agreement to pay a total of $438 million to Mali. This is in return for the release of its detained employees, seized gold, and restarting of operations at a local mine in the country. However, the West African nation's government is yet to approve the deal. Reports say last-minute hurdles could still derail the deal with the Canadian mining company. Now, Barrick Gold and Mali have been at odds with each other since 2023. This is over a contract based on new mining rules that gives the West African country a greater share in the gold mines operated in the country. The row has escalated several times, with Mali detaining 4 senior executives in November and issuing an arrest warrant for Barrick Gold's CEO Mark Bristow in December for charges of money laundering. In return, Barrick has launched an arbitration against Bamako. Now, the signing of the new agreement is likely to put an end to this dispute. It comes just weeks after the junta-led authorities seized gold stock at a mine operated by the Toronto-based mining company. In January, authorities flew nearly 3 metric tons of gold from the company's Loulo-Gounkoto mine complex in western Mali, and this prompted Barrick Gold to suspend its mining operations, leading to lower gold output. Late last week, the West African country reportedly gave Barrick a 1-week deadline to restart its operations. This was after a delegation of more than 15 representatives of Malian ministries, as well as private consulting firm, completed a 3-day inspection of Barrick's mining complex. Now, ever since Mali's junta seized power in 2020, it has repeatedly pledged to scrutinize its mining sector so that the country could benefit more from gold prices running at all-time highs. It has used legal disputes, arrests, and threats to deepen its ties with Russia, to assert greater control over its gold and uranium wealth. While some Western miners, such as the Canadian company B2 Gold, have reached an agreement swiftly with the Malian authorities, others, like Australia's Resolute, whose CEO was detained while in Mali for talks last year, took longer. But with Barrick Gold signing this agreement and looking to resume its operations, will the Mali junta agree to the new deal? We will keep you posted. And that's it on the show for today. We will see you again at the same time on Monday. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend, and goodbye.
Hello and a very warm welcome. I am Gushin Garlin and you're watching Firstpost. In the next few minutes, I get you the top 40 updates from around the world, only here on Fast and Factual. Let's get started. We begin with updates from the war in Europe. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky